We must finalize the integration plan by the end of this month.
But what about the water rights?
Developers are pushing. This fence lines the exact border of my land. We need to make that very clear.
I thought riding my own horse on my own land was the most ordinary thing in the world. Then one afternoon, the HOA decided it was suddenly their business. She walked onto the edge of my property carrying a clipboard and an attitude. She told me the HOA had received complaints about my horse riding. The paper called it a violation and demanded that I stop riding on my own property. I read it twice because I honestly thought there had to be a mistake. There was no mistake. They had actually issued me a $1,500 fine for riding my horse. That was when I decided this wasn't going to end with one letter. Instead of arguing, I sat down and read every rule they had cited. I wanted to know exactly where the HOA thought it had authority over my property. I asked them to point to the exact rule that prohibited me from riding my horse on my private land. Nobody answered immediately. For the first time, the room wasn't on the HOA president's side. People were beginning to realize that a horse wasn't the real issue. I gave the HOA one reasonable chance to withdraw the fine and respect my private property. I told them that if they refused, they would no longer have permission to use my property for anything. The HOA had been using portions of my property for neighborhood activities and access with my previous permission. That permission was now officially withdrawn. I gave them written notice that access to my property required my permission. There was nothing dramatic about it. It was simply a clear boundary. The next morning, the HOA came to discuss the situation again. This time, they weren't acting quite as confident as before. My horse stood behind me like he had no idea he had started a neighborhood controversy. I almost laughed at how serious everyone had become. The board finally reviewed the documents instead of simply repeating the complaint. That changed the entire conversation. One board member asked why the fine had been issued in the first place. The president's explanation suddenly sounded much weaker than it had before. Then one of my neighbors spoke up. He said the HOA shouldn't be fining someone for normal activity happening entirely on private land. Soon, other homeowners started asking questions too. The issue had become bigger than my horse. It was about how far the HOA's authority should go. The president tried to explain that she was simply enforcing the community standards. I agreed that standards mattered, but they had to apply where the HOA actually had authority. The property survey settled the biggest question. The riding area was clearly inside my private boundary. After reviewing everything, the board voted to withdraw the fine. My horse was no longer an HOA violation. The board also agreed that private property access needed clear written permission. No more assumptions. No more gray areas. I updated my gate policy and made the property boundaries clear. Anyone who needed access could simply ask me first. A few weeks later, the HOA came back with a completely different attitude. They weren't demanding access anymore. They were asking for it. I told her I had no problem cooperating when the request was reasonable. I just wanted my private property treated like private property. We reached a simple agreement that worked for everyone. The HOA could request access when necessary, but permission would always come first. After all that drama, I finally got back to what I actually wanted to do: ride my horse on my land and enjoy the property I worked so hard for. The HOA learned an important lesson about boundaries and communication. Rules work best when everyone understands exactly where they apply. I didn't need revenge threats or a big showdown. I simply set a clear boundary and made sure everyone respected it. In the end, the HOA withdrew the fine and respected my property boundaries. Sometimes the strongest way to win a neighborhood fight is simply to know your rights, stay calm, and stand your ground. Like, subscribe, and tell us where you're watching from.